Welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast. We bring together patients, experts, and health advocates who are all here to help you optimize your health. Here's your host, Jacqueline Garland.
Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the Gastro Girl podcast. Tonight we welcome designer director Saffron Cassady, who has suffered from ulcerative colitis for nearly a decade, and she's joined by Dr. Neil Stollman, a leading gastroenterologist and microbiome expert in Oakland, California, who offer expert insight on FMT, what patients need to know, and offer words of caution for anyone who may be thinking of trying this at home. Now, first of all, I watched Saffron's documentary recently, and it is truly amazing. She calls it a microbiome love story, and I totally agree with that. It was so well done, and it does a fantastic job of really getting the conversation going about gut health, the microbiome, and patient advocacy. And what I got from it at the beginning, you really were struggling, and you were almost desperate to try anything, as most patients can relate. So Saffron, before I jump into what your experience, I want to just have Dr. Stollman set the stage for what fecal microbiota transplantation is and what it is actually approved for or evidence around for treating.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start. And I'll start by saying, watch Saffron's movie, because it really is a really good primer on what this is. And I love the graphics and the cartoony kind of stuff. You've got some very stylized bugs in there, which I like. I will confess, I told you this before, Saffron, I watched your movie a couple of weeks ago. I thought it was great. And thought I was all ready for this. And last night I thought I was going to turn it back on again, just watch a few minutes in the front end, the few back end to kind of rejigger it in my brain so we'd be ready for talking about it today. And I turned on the first few minutes, and I look at my watch and it's an hour and 10 minutes later, and I've literally watched the whole thing again from start to finish. So obviously it engaged me even a second time. We'll talk more about the movie, and Saffron goes into great detail as a setup for this. But for our audience here, FMT, Fecal Microbiota Transplant, that's the term we use. And that in the very simplest sense means taking poop or fecal material from a ostensibly healthy person, putting it in an ostensibly ill person with the aim of making that ill person better. That's essentially what FMT is. As you probably know, this is not really new. It's sort of new for us today, but ancient cultures were doing this years and years ago. Veterinarians have been doing this for about more than 100 years. This is common in the veterinarian world. It's only in the sort of last decade or two that it's become of interest in the human world. And I'll expand on that just because I think this is a really important distinction in that in the human world today, the sort of test case, the index case, has been this gut infection called C. difficile that most of us have probably heard about. It's an infection in the gut. It's a bacteria that normally is kind of suppressed by all of our good bacteria. And then typically if someone has an illness like ulcerative colitis and gets medicines or steroids, people get antibiotics most typically, and that kills some of the good guys in your ecosystem. And it lets this bad boy, C. diff, kind of come up as an opportunist. And then we do kind of a silly thing if you think about it. We have a bug that is caused by antibiotics, so we give you more antibiotics, which is kind of a ridiculous way to approach a problem caused by antibiotics. Obviously, in the last few decades, we've realized that FMT, one simple FMT, is a really effective treatment for C. diff. The data is extraordinary, and Saffron does go into this in her movie. And that was kind of the canary in the coal mine. That's kind of what set us up for this. And as a tiny editorial comment, we got lucky as hell that we chose that. I mean, that was kind of the place we started because it works. I mean, there's an unequivocal data set. You quote 90% in the movie, and I think that's a fair estimate. I've done 200-300 of these at least now, and I think my success rate for C. diff, and we'll elaborate on that, but for C. diff, the success rate is extraordinary with one FMT. And getting maybe ahead of ourselves, but literally in the last few weeks, there is now an FDA-approved product for this, which when Saffron made her movie was a pie in the sky, concept. But as of January of this year, the FDA has approved its first human stool product for C. diff. Again, to qualify that, very much not for Saffron, who has a different illness, but for C. diff, we now have poop enemas available to be delivered to a human for C. diff. And that's been an extraordinary decade. So that's the background. And then within that context, I'll certainly let Saffron tell her own story, which she can tell far better than I ever could.
Yeah, no, that's such a great stage. So Saffron, going back to you, first of all, how long had you been living with ulcerative colitis before you decided to try FMT? Like, how long were you struggling with this disease?
I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis around my 20th birthday. And so I had it for about a decade, and it was around my 30th birthday that I decided, I've had this disease for a decade. I started off on medications that were working quite well for me, and I was very happy to be on medications that were working well for me, but slowly over time, they weren't as effective. I was being put on higher classes of drugs. I was taking rounds of steroids on a yearly basis, and even the steroids weren't doing as much as they had at the beginning. So about a decade into this illness is when I kind of decided I want to try something different. I had heard about fecal transplant. I had been following the research on fecal transplant for a long time. I knew that it was most effective for C. diff. There were some clinical trials going on around ulcerative colitis that had promising results. I knew that there was some risk involved, but for me, it was a bit of a risk to benefit analysis that I had to do, and which led me to try this procedure. There weren't any options for me. There are clinical trials available for anyone wanting to try fecal transplant for a condition like colitis, but I did not have one near me. So I saw my best option as using my partner, my now husband, as my stool donor.
Yeah, we don't want to give too much away because we want people to watch the film, but not only did you undertake this procedure it's kind of scary, and it's kind of like, oh my God, for the average person, like, you did what? But not only did you pursue that, but you documented it and decided to do a documentary about it. So what were your goals with this documentary? What were you trying to convey to your fellow patients and the research world? I mean, what were you trying to do here?
First of all, I was just incredibly curious about this treatment. I was spending a lot of my own personal time researching it. And they say, do what you love. I'm a documentary filmmaker by profession. I kind of thought, if this is the thing that I can't stop thinking about or researching, I would love to make a documentary film about this. I would love the opportunity to meet with some of these, leading experts on this topic and learn more about it. And I want the opportunity to talk about it because at the time, I think I was feeling a lot of angst. I was feeling angst toward my doctor, toward the medical system, toward my condition. I really felt like this is something I want to talk about. I want to be talked about. I think people have a hard time talking about these kind of pooping diseases. And I think that I was really hurt by that at the time. I thought that more people should be talking about these illnesses. And I felt that more people should be talking about this procedure, which sounds weird and wacky and almost sounds like pseudoscience. And I think a lot of people might just kind of brush it off as like a weird alternative health thing. But it's not. It's legitimate science. And I wanted people to understand that. And I wanted to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and you did a great job. And again, I don't want to ask too many questions about the film because we really want people to watch the film. But Dr. Stollman, I mean, Saffron isn't alone in her angst, being a patient and frustrated with, the typical treatment plans and things that aren't working. What do you say to patients who are like Saffron that are frustrated and they want to take things into their own hands, not necessarily doing FMT, but just trying something that they read about? Like, what is your advice for patients?
I'm pretty open-minded. I've been in this space and I was doing this before it was ever, I was working with a blender and doing this when my hospital literally scoffed at us when we were doing this. I've been doing this for 10 or 12 years. So you have to be open-minded and you have to get past the ick, as you call it, which is the right term. And you have to get people to understand, certainly the patient and the world around us as well, that this is incredibly plausible. It sounds really bizarre and it's the stuff of cartoons and TV shows and a lot of jokes and internet memes, but in fact, it's incredibly plausible. There's total plausibility to this. You have a disrupted biome. They don't know how to actually fix your biome. So let's put a new one in, right? So it makes tremendous sense. Medicine isn't binary. And I have this conversation with patients all the time. It's not, oh, this is all good or this is all bad. It is in your situation, which is a very unique situation to you particularly. There are risks and maybe unknown risks. And that's part of the issue with this thing is not all the risks are known. But there are known risks, potentially unknown risks. And then, of course, there's a potential benefit, not a clear benefit. And I really try to empower my patients like you within the realm of legality and ethics. And there are some boundaries to that. But within those boundaries, I think it's very appropriate to kind of think about your own, what do I have to gain? What do I have to lose? And you frame it that in the film a lot. And I really like that because I think that's the right sort of ethical, thoughtful way to frame this. It's not a one size fits all. Not everyone has that same equation. That equation is really unique to you, and you explain very rationally how it was for you the right equation, and it certainly won't be for many people, but it may be for others. So I try to empower that, I guess, Jackie, to answer the question.
Yeah, and what I loved about your film too is that you were very upfront with, you're not trying to make a do-it-yourself, guide on how to do this. It really was about your journey as a patient, trying to find relief and health and happiness overall, and you were willing to do whatever. And I thought you did a very good job and a very responsible job of talking to the leading experts in the field. I mean, Tom Barodi, Paul Moietti, the folks at Open Biome, who Dr. Stollman knows well. I mean, you did a great job, and you opened up. I think you really give patients a very accessible way to understand this topic and this area of health.
Well, thank you. Yeah, like I said, I think I started with the angst, and then I wanted to prove my doctor wrong. I wanted to cure myself. That was my whole goal.
Love it.
So I just kind of ran out of the gate, like, I'm going to do this and no one can tell me no. Later in the film and later in my journey, I did kind of have this realization through talking to the leading experts that this is more complicated than I think I originally thought. I had heard a few anecdotes of people with colitis doing this treatment and it being incredibly successful for them. But of course, we tend to hear anecdotes that are extremely positive or extremely negative. And I was following these positive anecdotes thinking that's going to happen to me. And then I had this realization of it might not work for me. Someone might try this film and want to try fecal transplant, and it might not work for them. They might have a bad reaction to it. So as a filmmaker, I had to ask those difficult questions of, is it responsible for me to be putting this out into the public? And in the end, I hope that, people come away with more knowledge on fecal transplant, both the benefits and the potential risks, and understanding where we are right now, because we're not quite there yet when it comes to conditions like ulcerative colitis. We're getting close, and we should all be supporting the research and joining these clinical trials, but there's a lot we still don't know.
Well, it has so much potential. I mean, poop does, right? It has so much potential. And I know, Dr. Stollman, about a lot of the research that's going on that has nothing to do with GI, but it's so fascinating, and again, we're just going to say that these things aren't proven yet. They're looking at autism, obesity, other health conditions. You can talk more about this, like where the research is going. That's so exciting.
Yeah, there's so many. Mark Smith in your film makes a comment about how this, I think certainly Tom Barodi does too, about how this really is the index of it, but it's a much bigger thing. It's like, you sequence one gene for one illness, and that's cool, and you've got a gene and you've got an illness, but that's not what gene therapy is. I mean, the massive applications of that are, I think, easier to understand, but I think there's similarly massive implications here. You're talking about one person and one illness and one protocol, but there is a meta to that micro, right? And that's kind of a great, I think, narrative to tell a story in. You are the sort of small story, and I'm not calling you small, Saffron, but you are. Your story is a one person, one intervention tale. But there is, and you capture that very well, as do your expert consultants, there's a much bigger meta here, which is, what is the role of our ecosystem in health and illness, our bug ecosystem, our biome, if you will. It's not even bacterial ecosystem. There's viruses and phages and fungi and other things in there. What is the role of that ecosystem in health and illness? And can we manipulate that and improve health? What an incredible concept. And that was exactly what underlied your journey, was trying to do that. And I think it's a nice way to think about it. Your audience will certainly follow along your micro journey, and you've done, I think, a very good job of just highlighting that there's really a much bigger picture than just you. Tom Barodi, who's one of the experts you talked to. He's an Australian madman in the best sense of the word, and you can tell him I said that. He's a big thinker, and that's how he talks too. And he sees this meta in a sort of bolder way, I think, than many of us get more focused on. And I think it's really important to talk about both sides of that. And I think you did a good job of that.
Yeah, and you also, you do such a good job of bringing the human element to this. Obviously, it's a patient journey story, but you do it in such a way that it makes it very watchable and emotional. I was watching it, The ending was emotional for me. The journey, I laughed at certain parts. The whole scene at the beginning when you were asking your partner to do this big thing for you was so sweet. And, he deserves an award for just being open-minded. Like, that is not an easy thing to agree to, no matter how much you love someone. And I thought that was just so great. And I really encourage everyone to watch this film. Now, I want to ask a couple of questions about the film. What was, I know when you make films, there's probably lots of stuff that goes on the cutting room floor. Were there really emotional points to your journey that, didn't make the film? And I'm sure it was up and down with your process. You got a lot of that during the process, but were there other things that were very challenging when you were going through this that you'd like to share?
There were a lot of challenges along my journey, and my journey was very long. This isn't something that I did once and it worked. It really, I was experimenting with it for 3 years before I really saw a noticeable improvement. So things that weren't seen, a lot of the boring ups and downs, and that's how it is with chronic illness. The film isn't just, I was sick, I tried this thing and I got better. You see one of these blips where I do get sick again. That happened a lot. I'd feel like this is really working, and then I'd feel like I took 2 steps back, like it's not working. And I was just so confused. And every time I got sick again, it felt more devastating because you get your hopes up and you start to feel good and you think, okay, I can get better. And then you start to think, this is never going away. I'll never be better. So there's a bit of that in the film, but there's certainly a lot more of that. And I think a lot of people suffering from chronic illness can relate to that. Healing is not linear. It's not a linear journey.
Yeah.
There are highs and lows.
That was really powerful. Now, how are you feeling now? How are you doing now?
I'm actually doing really well. So my colitis went into full remission 3 years ago, and I've not had a symptom since.
That's
so yeah, I do think the fecal transplant really worked for me. I am still on a medication. So in the film, I do experiment with going off all medication. And that was the first time I kind of relapsed and went back into a flare. Now that my symptoms are gone, I'm still on a mild dose of medication, a 5-ASA medication, and I've decided to stay on this medication. So I think I started out with this goal of, I want to cure myself, no drugs, symptom-free, medication-free. And I've lowered my expectation a bit, which is, maybe it's okay to just be in complete clinical remission, but be on a mild drug that has very low side effects. And that's my happy place right now. Maybe one day I won't need the drugs, because I do, with each passing month, seem to be feeling better and better. I'm at a place where I don't have any dietary restrictions. I can kind of eat what I want. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. And I'm very happy.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Now, I have 2 more questions. The first is for you, Dr. Stollman. For anyone who watches the film and is thinking about doing it themselves and who Saffron's story really resonates with them, what are your cautionary words of wisdom or advice for anyone? That's just a natural thing that's going to come out of this.
Yeah.
People are going to want to try it.
The first answer is watch Saffron movie, because she's very good at saying, don't do what I did necessarily. Here's the pathway. And you make a really good point of highlighting that there are clinical trials around. There's a website that you give called clinicaltrials.gov, which is in your movie, I think, which refers people to where these trials are. There are a lot more trials than when you started this journey. So it's not impossible to find a clinical trial if you're a patient who's trying to do this. Do it yourself is fraught. And again, Saffron doesn't hide that at all. Acknowledge that there could be risks, and that Saffron, you didn't describe any horrible outcomes, but recognize that in every trial of FMT for ulcerative colitis, there's a subset of people who get worse, not better. It's not a large subset, but it is in fact possible, plausible, and must be acknowledged that there is certainly no guarantee. And not only is there no guarantee, there's evidence that some subset of people not only don't do better, there are people who do worse. Maybe you chose the right guy, but maybe you choose the wrong guy or something, or the wrong bug balance. And you can make yourself worse. That's a fact. There happens to be a series, Colleen Kelly, another expert in this world, actually, I think it's Colleen, did a series of a poll of people of do-it-yourself FMTers for all different reasons, IBS and IBD and Crohn's and a million different reasons. So it wasn't just you, it wasn't a controlled arm, but she basically interviewed 100 people who did it themselves. And the large majority of them said, I would love to do this with a healthcare provider if that were available to me. That was the uniform. I did this because I didn't have that option. And you clearly described that again in the movie. You're not overstating that. You had no way to get in a trial. This was not approved for your illness. Your only choice was figure it out and do it yourself or not do it. And I think that's something that very few of us in this world are Saffron. And that's okay. So yeah, maybe I'll leave that out there as it is, but this was not a weekend trivial idea. Clearly, this was, as you mentioned, years of work and effort and consulting with experts. And this was not just I'm going to do this weekend. It's not like painting the garage. It's a much bigger endeavor. And I don't tell patients not to do this. I don't say this is horrible. You shouldn't do this. You're taking your life in your hands. I encourage an approach much like yours was, a thorough, thoughtful approach. Really talk to your doctor. And you did in the movie, again, not to steal the movie, but you spent a lot of time talking to your doctor, who was somewhat skeptical, or comes off as somewhat skeptical in the film anyway. And I hope that's not the case with the patients who are listening to this. I think if you have a good relationship with a doctor, they should, not that they're going to do it for you, they're not, they can't, in fact, but they should certainly be able to have a conversation with you about what is right for you. So I would encourage people to talk to their doc. And if their doc slams the door on that, it's probably not the right doc for them, frankly. And look online for trials that are available. There are pills coming. Saffron did not have pills available to her. Again, not to steal them. You even had some diagrams in there about enemas and the like. This is not a movie for the faint of heart, just be very clear here. But there are pills coming too and available now. And I think that's going to accelerate the experimentation, because it's just frankly much easier than some of this is the concept and the biology, but some of it is just practically complicated. How do you get poop in a form where from one human to another? That is not trivial. Pills are going to make that a simpler process, and I think really amplify. I think Brody might have said that in your film too, but I think that's pretty clear. So hold on to the audience. There's stuff coming soon. And let me just add one other thing. Saffron is doing great, and that's wonderful too. But there are studies in this. Paul Miotti and Tom and others have looked at this. This is not unstudied. There is some data, and just realize the data for those who are significantly better, it's maybe a third of people. It's not 90% of people. C. diff, it is 90% of people, but for ulcerative colitis, it is a much smaller number. It is not zero. It is a real number, and it's a number that's higher than placebo. But have rational expectations. Even in the best trials with Paul or Tom or these experts, the win is a third. It's not 90%. And I think the audience who's considering this needs to know that. That's that's what you're aiming for, is to be in that third. It's not everybody.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And I think it's a great, inspiring film for all patients. It really gives a good example of the power of patient being empowered to take control of their health situation and do all they can to feel better. Saffron, what would you like to say to people who are considering checking out your film? I think they should definitely check out your film, but what would you say to folks to get them to watch the film? It's great.
Well, I really hope that, anybody who's suffering from some sort of bowel related condition will check out this film, because it's not just about fecal transplant. We do kind of get into the microbiome in general. And obviously this is a hot medical buzzword right now. So, we have some of the leading experts talking about the microbiome, this procedure. You get to see my journey. Parts of it are a little bit gross, but we definitely go there. And yeah, like I said, part of my angst was the fact that this is an embarrassing condition to have. And I think a lot of people are suffering from illnesses that affect the bowel. I'm hoping that this kind of lets people feel a little bit better about the fact that, if she can talk about it or be open about it, it shouldn't just be embarrassing. People are really suffering, so it should be taken seriously. And we can laugh about it. We can joke about it for sure. But at the same time, I wasn't laughing when I was, crying on the bathroom floor in severe pain. This is a really real illness that deserves to be taken seriously and spoken about in a way that's not just with disgust.
No, and what really was powerful for me was that, like I said before, it was really accessible. You present the information on the microbiome in a very easy to understand way. You have great resources on your website that accompanies the film. I encourage people to check that out. You have a lot of articles on the microbiome, the FMT, and it's really important. You have a lot of resources and links to research, which I think is great. Tell us when this is going to drop. When can people see it, and how can they see the film?
So this year in 2023, we are going to be doing screenings. So we'll have, some community screening events. We'll be doing some film festivals. Those dates will be available on our website, designershitdocumentary.com. And we're hoping in early 2024, we'll have our official release date for where you can find the film online.
Oh, this is wonderful. I am so excited for you. Again, I feel honored that you're on our show today. Dr. Stollman, as always, you're always add so much depth to the discussion with your knowledge and experience as a gastroenterologist and microbiome expert. I know you've been doing this a long time. Thank you both for the great conversation tonight, and I look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you for listening to the Gastro Girl podcast. For more information and resources, please visit gastrogirl.com. Do you have a question for Gastro Girl? Please email podcast@gastrogirl.com. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Gastro Girl podcast are not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Please consult a licensed clinician in your state regarding all matters related to your health.